"Watch where you're going, old woman." The voice cracked through the air like a whip. In the gleaming marble lobby of Apex Towers, all eyes turned, then quickly looked away. Mimar Grace, her silver-threaded hair pulled back tight, was kneeling to mop a spill when the corner of her bucket caught the heel of a young man striding past. A few droplets of dirty water splashed onto the crisp white shirt of Tommy Whale, the only son of Chief Akin Whale, the building's powerful executive. Tommy stopped. His smile faded into a thin, cold line. Without warning, he swung his leg, sending the bucket clattering against the wall and knocking the old woman hard to the floor. The sound echoed. Gasps rippled, but no one moved. Grace didn't cry out. She rose slowly, brushing the dust from her palms, her gaze locking on his with a calm that cut deeper than any shout. "One day," she said, her voice steady and unshaken, "you will kneel before me." Tommy laughed, dismissive, already walking away. But if he had looked back, he might have noticed the strange glint in her eyes. Less pain, more promise. Within days, that promise would erupt into a storm that would shatter reputations, strip away power, and turn the city's most untouchable man into its most disgraced son. The incident in the lobby spread through the building like wildfire. By lunch, every department had heard some version of the story. Some swore Tommy had shoved her twice. Others claimed she had been crying on the floor. None of them dared say it out loud when Tommy passed by. Tommy Whale was untouchable. Being the only son of Chief Akin Whale meant rules bent around him. His office on the 21st floor was bigger than most meeting rooms. His suits were custom-tailored. His watch worth more than an employee's yearly salary. But the thing he valued most was the power to make people small. That afternoon, he strutted into a board meeting late, leaning back in his chair as if the world owed him patience. He made jokes at the expense of junior staff. He waved away a presentation without looking at it. To him, authority wasn't something earned. It was something inherited. Meanwhile, down in the service corridor, Mimar Grace was back at work. Her movements were slow but precise, the mop sliding across the tile in silent rhythm. To the few who saw her, she was just an old janitor finishing her shift. But in her mind, pieces were already falling into place. 10 years of watching, waiting, and preparing had brought her here. And the arrogant boy who had humiliated her had just given her the perfect opening. She glanced at the clock. In 10 minutes, the elevator would take her not to the basement, but to the top floor. Few people knew her clearance card could reach the executive suites. Even fewer knew why. Tommy was still smirking when the meeting adjourned. He didn't notice the ripple of silence that followed Mimar Grace as she stepped into the corridor outside the boardroom. The executives looked at her with a mix of confusion and discomfort. She didn't belong here, at least not in their eyes. But she walked straight past them, her footsteps unhurried, her eyes fixed on the massive double doors at the end. Without knocking, she pushed them open. Inside, Chief Akin Whale sat behind a mahogany desk, reviewing reports. He looked up and froze. For the first time in a decade, the real owner of Apex Towers had stepped into his office. And she wasn't here to mop the floor. Chief Akin Whale leaned back in his chair, trying to mask his surprise with a thin smile. "Well, this is unexpected," he said slowly. "Shouldn't you be downstairs?" Mimar Grace didn't answer. She stepped forward, pulling off her worn cleaning gloves one finger at a time, her gaze never leaving his. The sound of the gloves hitting the desk was small, but in the thick silence, it might as well have been thunder. "I think," she said calmly, "it's time the board hears from the person who built this company." Akin's eyes narrowed. "You're talking to the wrong man, Grace. Whatever grievance you have." "This isn't about grievance," she cut in, her tone sharp enough to slice through the air. "It's about truth." She reached into the leather folder she carried, placing a stack of documents on the desk. Share certificates, the name on them, hers. For a moment, Akin just stared, his jaw tightening. "This can't be." "It is," she said. 62% ownership. My signature. 10 years ago, I stepped away. You were supposed to keep this place alive, not turn it into your personal empire." Before he could answer, the doors swung open. A cluster of board members stepped in, their voices hushed, their eyes darting between Akin and the old woman in pale yellow. Grace straightened. "Gentlemen, ladies, I apologize for interrupting your schedules, but there's something you need to witness." Tommy appeared in the doorway, his face still set in that same arrogant smirk. until his eyes landed on her. Recognition flickered, not of her identity, but of the humiliation he had delivered hours earlier. "What is she doing here?" he scoffed. "Security." "No," one of the board members interrupted, their tone unsteady. "You need to listen." Grace's voice carried through the room like a judge's gavel. "As of this moment, Chief Akinwale is relieved of his duties as CEO. I am resuming my position as head of Apex Towers, effective immediately." The room froze. Tommy's smirk vanished. Akin's knuckles whitened against the desk. And somewhere in the far corner, a reporter's camera clicked, capturing the exact moment the balance of power shifted. The next morning, the city woke to a headline that no one could ignore. Billionaire janitor oust CEO of Apex Towers. News vans clogged the street outside the glass building, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Every major channel replayed the same footage. Mimar Grace, standing in the boardroom, her scarf draped over one shoulder, her voice steady as she reclaimed the company. The clip of Tommy kicking her in the lobby was now slowed down, dissected, replayed with angry commentators calling it the kick that cost a dynasty. Inside Apex Towers, chaos reigned. Staff clustered in corners, whispering, scrolling through their phones. Some wore guilty expressions, remembering how they had looked away in the lobby, afraid to intervene. Others were just stunned, trying to reconcile the image of the quiet old woman mopping floors with the reality that she owned more than half the company. Chief Akinwale sat in his now former office, staring at the blank wall where his portrait had hung just hours ago. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Lawyers, bankers, old political allies distancing themselves. The first blow had already landed. His accounts frozen, pending investigation into misappropriated funds. Down the hall, Tommy was feeling the weight of public humiliation. His face was everywhere. Angry screenshots from the lobby camera, headlines calling him the heir who kicked it all away. He tried calling friends, but every conversation ended with excuses. They were busy. They needed space. In the cafeteria, two junior employees scrolled through their phones and whispered. "She's not even bragging about it," one said, showing a photo of Grace walking past reporters without a word. "She's just back to work." But Grace wasn't here to gloat. She was in a meeting with the legal team, signing the papers that would seal Akin's removal. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice carried the finality of someone who had waited too long for this day. From this point forward, she told them, Apex Towers will be run with the dignity it should have always had. No more fear, no more arrogance. Outside, the reporters kept shouting her name, but she didn't break stride. As she stepped into the waiting car, cameras flashed, and somewhere in the noise, Tommy's voice called out. Not to apologize. Not yet, but with the first hint of desperation that the world had ever heard from him. It wouldn't be the last time. The office that had once been Chief Akinwale's fortress now felt like a prison cell. The curtains were drawn, shutting out the relentless glare of camera flashes from the street below. He sat slumped in his leather chair, sleeves rolled up, tie loose, a glass of untouched whiskey on the desk. The door burst open without a knock. Tommy stormed in, his face pale, his jaw tight. "You're just going to sit here while she takes everything?" he demanded. Akin didn't look up. "Everything is already gone, Tommy." Tommy's voice cracked. "Because of her. Because you let some cleaning lady walk all over you." Akin's head snapped up, his eyes sharp. "Watch your mouth. That cleaning lady built this empire before you were even born. And I told you, your actions made this happen." The silence that followed was heavier than the air in the room. Tommy's hands clenched into fists. "So that's it? You're just going to blame me?" Akin rose slowly from his chair, the weight of years of power and the sudden collapse of it etched in every movement. "I warned you, son. Your arrogance, your temper, it would destroy you. I can't protect you anymore." The words hit harder than any slap. Tommy staggered back, as if something had been ripped from under him. "You're cutting me off? I'm letting you face the consequences." Akin said coldly. "You wanted to be untouchable. Now you'll see what it's like to stand on your own." Tommy's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, another message from a so-called friend canceling their plans. The truth settled like ice in his stomach. He had no one, no allies, no safety net. Outside, the sound of reporters shouting Grace's name drifted up from the street. Tommy looked toward the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. For the first time in his life, Fear, not anger, was in his eyes. Akin sat back down, picking up the untouched glass of whiskey. "You should leave," he said quietly, "before you learn the rest of what the world has to say about you." Tommy stood frozen for a moment, then turned and walked out. The click of the door closing echoed like a final verdict. Somewhere deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of his fall. The midday sun beat down on the streets of Lagos, its glare bouncing off car hoods and glass windows. Tommy stepped out of the building with his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. The once perfect suit now wrinkled and slightly stained from a morning of wandering with no destination. The chauffeur wasn't there. The sleek black car he always took for granted was gone. He scanned the street and spotted 3 of his former drinking buddies sitting at a cafe terrace. Relief washed over him. Maybe they hadn't abandoned him after all. "Hey," he called out, forcing a smile as he walked over. They exchanged quick glances, their laughter fading into an awkward silence. One of them leaned back in his chair, sunglasses hiding his eyes. "Tommy, we're kind of in the middle of something." "It's fine. I just need a place to crash for a few days," Tommy said casually, like it was no big deal. "Things are complicated right now." The tallest of the 3 cleared his throat. "Yeah, about that. It's not a good idea. You know, with the news and all. People are talking. We can't get dragged into this." Tommy's forced grin faltered. "Dragged into what? I'm still the same person." "No, man," one of them said softly, almost pitying. "You're not. Not to them. You're trouble now." The words hit harder than Grace's heel had in the lobby. He stared at their untouched cups of coffee, the clink of a spoon against porcelain sounding like a door closing in his face. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his shadow stretching long across the cracked pavement. Hours later, he found himself in a dimly lit bar on the edge of the city. The air smelled of sweat and stale beer, a far cry from the rooftop lounges he used to frequent. A man at the counter eyed him curiously. "You looking for work?" the man asked, his voice low. Tommy hesitated. "What kind of work?" The man shrugged. "Anything that pays. No questions asked." A flicker of desperation crossed Tommy's face. Pride battled with hunger, and hunger won. He nodded slowly. "Good," the man said with a faint smile. "Let's start tonight." As the door swung shut behind them, Tommy didn't realize he had just taken his first step into a world far darker than he imagined. And there would be no easy way back. Night had settled over the city, the streets shimmering under flickering neon signs and the dim glow of street lamps. Tommy followed the man from the bar through a narrow alley, each step echoing off wet concrete walls. The air smelled of gasoline and old smoke. At the alley's end, a metal door swung open to reveal a small warehouse, its interior buzzing with low voices and the clatter of crates being stacked. Inside, men moved quickly, loading boxes into the back of an unmarked van. The man from the bar, who now introduced himself as Depo, motioned for Tommy to follow him deeper inside. "This is simple," Depo said, his tone flat. "You move what we tell you to move, you keep your mouth shut, and you get paid." Tommy glanced around. The boxes weren't labeled, but the way they were handled, careful yet urgent, told him they weren't carrying anything legal. "I thought you said this was just work," Tommy muttered. "It is. Work that keeps you fed," Depo replied, handing him a pair of gloves. "Or do you have a better offer?" Tommy swallowed hard. Pride was useless now. He pulled on the gloves and got to work, his hands trembling slightly as he lifted the first box. Hours passed in a blur of sweat and whispers. By the time the last van rolled away, Tommy's back ached and his palms were raw. Depo handed him an envelope thick with cash. "Good start," Depo said. "If you're still around next week, there's more." Tommy nodded, stuffing the envelope into his pocket. Outside, the air felt heavier, the city somehow colder. He walked for nearly an hour before finding himself on a quiet overpass. Below, the traffic hummed like a distant storm. He leaned on the railing, staring at the moving lights, his mind replaying every moment from the past week. The lobby, the humiliation, his father's silence, his so-called friends turning away. And now this. Somewhere deep down, he knew he was standing on a thin edge. One more step in the wrong direction, and there would be no turning back. But as his phone buzzed in his pocket, he didn't move away from the edge. The screen lit up with an unknown number and a short message. "Meet me tomorrow, 9 a.m. I can help you, but it will cost." Tommy stared at it for a long moment. The city lights reflected in his eyes, sharp and uncertain. He didn't know it yet, but the person behind that message was about to change everything, and not in the way he expected. Tommy barely slept that night. The message replayed in his head until dawn broke over the city. By the time the streets began to stir with the first wave of morning commuters, he was already on his way to the meeting point, an old cafe tucked between a pawn shop and a closed-down bookstore. The place was quiet, its faded awning swaying in the wind. Inside, the air smelled of strong coffee and old wood. A woman sat alone at a corner table, her back straight, her hands wrapped around a cup she didn't drink from. She was dressed simply, a gray coat, dark scarf, but her presence seemed to pull the room in around her. Tommy approached cautiously. "You're the one who sent the message?" She looked up, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "Sit." He did. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You've made a mess of things, but you still have something most people in your position don't, a way back." Tommy leaned in, his voice low. "And what exactly is that supposed to mean?" "It means," she said, sliding a slim envelope across the table, "that the people you've started working with are dangerous. You're a pawn to them. They'll use you, then erase you. I can get you out, but you'll have to do something for me first." Tommy hesitated, his fingers resting on the envelope but not opening it. "And why would you help me?" Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Because I don't like to see wasted potential. And because you're not as invisible as you think." The words sent a chill down his spine. He finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph, a man in a tailored suit, shaking hands with someone Tommy recognized from the warehouse the night before. "That's the one pulling the strings," she said. "He has a shipment leaving the country in 2 days. I need proof of what's inside. You're going to get it." Tommy exhaled slowly. "And if I say no?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Then you go back to carrying boxes until one day you don't come back at all." For a long moment, the only sound between them was the quiet hum of the cafe. Then Tommy slipped the photograph back into the envelope and nodded. "All right, I'll do it." She leaned back, her expression unreadable. "Good. Then listen carefully, because there's more at stake here than you realize." That night, Tommy stood outside the warehouse again, the cold air seeping into his bones. The photograph from the envelope was burned into his mind. The man's face, the confident handshake, the look of someone untouchable. The cafe woman's words kept echoing. "More at stake than you realize." He waited until the security guard at the front went inside for a smoke. Slipping through the side gate, he moved like a shadow between rows of stacked crates. The place smelled of oil and damp wood. Somewhere in the distance, a forklift hummed, its sound masking his footsteps. In the corner, under the pale glow of a single bulb, was the shipment. The crates were newer, cleaner, marked with fresh stencils. He crouched down, pulling out his phone to snap a few pictures. But as the camera clicked, he heard voices, not the casual chatter of workers, but low, tense murmurs. Peering around the crates, he saw the man from the photo. He was speaking to another figure Tommy recognized, one of the same men who had been in the office the day he was humiliated in the lobby. The conversation was sharp, almost whispered, but Tommy caught fragments. Delivery by midnight. No mistakes. The old woman. The hairs on the back of his neck rose. Were they talking about the woman from the cafe? Or someone else entirely? Suddenly, a loud crash rang out from the far end of the warehouse, a dropped metal bar. Both men turned, their eyes sweeping the space. Tommy froze, his back pressed against the crate. Heart pounding so loud he was sure they could hear it. One of them barked an order, and footsteps started in his direction. Thinking fast, Tommy slipped his phone into his pocket and slid between two pallets, keeping low until he reached a narrow service door. He pushed it open and stepped into the night air, his breath visible in the cold. He didn't stop walking until he was 2 blocks away, ducking into the cover of an alley. There, under the dim light of a flickering street lamp, he pulled out his phone. The pictures were blurry but clear enough to show the crate numbers and markings. He sent them to the number the woman had given him. Seconds later, his phone buzzed with a reply. "Good. Now meet me tomorrow. And Tommy, don't talk to anyone." For the first time, he realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. He was inside something bigger, and walking away was no longer an option. The next morning, the city felt different to Tommy. Every face on the street seemed like it might be watching him. Every glance felt a little too long. He kept his hands deep in his pockets as he made his way toward the meeting spot, an old bus depot on the edge of the industrial district. The place was half abandoned, its faded green paint peeling away, windows cracked and clouded with dust. Inside, a single bench sat under a skylight streaked with grime. And on that bench, the old woman from the cafe was waiting. She wore the same worn coat, the same steady expression, but her eyes held something sharper now, a glint of urgency. "You took the pictures?" she said without greeting. "Good. They confirm what I suspected." Tommy sat down, his voice low. "Who are those men? And why are they talking about you?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small black folder. Inside were photographs, documents, even handwritten letters. "Those men work for someone who's been bleeding this city dry for years," she said. "And yes, I've been in their way before." He scanned the papers, trying to piece it together. "So you're, what, a journalist? An investigator?" Her lips curved into a thin, humorless smile. "I'm someone who has lost too much to stay quiet." Before Tommy could respond, the screech of tires outside made them both turn. A black van had pulled up beside the depot, its sliding door already half open. Two men stepped out, moving with the kind of precision that told Tommy they weren't here by accident. "They followed you," she said quietly, her eyes narrowing. "Stay calm. Follow my lead." She stood, walking toward the far exit with deliberate slowness, her hand lightly gripping Tommy's arm as if they were just leaving together. But the men were already closing in, their shadows stretching long across the cracked concrete floor. In a sudden motion, the woman pushed Tommy toward a side corridor. "Run," she hissed. Tommy didn't argue. His footsteps echoed through the narrow passage, heart hammering in his chest. Behind him, he heard the thud of boots and the muffled shouts of the men. He burst through a rusted door into the open air, blinking against the sudden daylight. By the time he reached the main road, there was no sign of her. Just the faint hum of the van's engine in the distance, and the sinking realization that whoever she was, she had just made herself their target again. Tommy didn't stop running until his legs burned and his breath came in ragged gasps. He leaned against the wall of a small corner store, trying to make sense of what had just happened. People passed by without a glance, unaware that he had just escaped something dangerous. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, thinking of calling the police. But the memory of the woman's steady voice stopped him. If she didn't trust the authorities, maybe there was a reason. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and scanned the street. A flash of pale blue caught his eye. Across the road, half hidden by a row of parked cars, the woman was there. She wasn't running. She walked at an even pace, her scarf swaying lightly in the breeze as though nothing had happened. She didn't look back. Tommy crossed the street and fell into step beside her. "Why didn't you run with me?" he demanded. Still panting, her eyes stayed forward. "Because running only works if you have nowhere left to go. I still have somewhere." She led him through winding back streets until they reached a modest apartment building, the kind with peeling paint and a dim hallway light that flickered overhead. Inside her small unit, she locked the door and drew the curtains. On the table sat the black folder again, now open to reveal more documents than before. She handed him a photo. It was a younger version of her, standing beside a man Tommy didn't recognize, but the background was unmistakable. The Apex Towers building loomed behind them. "That's you, and that's..." Tommy started, then stopped. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "The man who ran this city before your father's boss came along. My husband, your real boss's father." Tommy's stomach dropped. "Wait, you're telling me?" "I'm telling you I built this empire with my own hands. And I walked away so it wouldn't destroy the people I loved. But now," her gaze sharpened, "they've gone too far. I'm taking it back." The weight of her words pressed on him. All at once, the pieces began to fit. The way she carried herself, the certainty in her voice. The way those men had looked at her like she wasn't just some random woman in their way. Outside, a car engine idled in the street. The woman's eyes flicked toward the sound. "We don't have much time. Tommy, if you want to make things right, you're coming with me." And just like that, Tommy knew his life was about to change forever. Tommy followed her down the narrow stairwell, his pulse matching the hurried rhythm of her steps. The street outside was dim, the single streetlight casting a long shadow of the two of them as they moved toward a nondescript sedan parked at the corner. She opened the driver's door without hesitation, motioning for him to get in the passenger seat. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice low. "To finish what they started," she replied, turning the key. The engine came to life with a quiet hum, and the car slipped into the night. For several minutes, the only sound was the faint music from the radio and the steady beat of the wipers brushing away a light drizzle. Tommy's mind churned with questions, but every time he looked at her profile, calm, sharp, and unreadable, he knew interrupting her thoughts would be a mistake. Finally, she spoke. "There's a board meeting at Apex Towers in less than an hour. They don't know I'm coming, but they'll know me when I walk in." The image of her stepping into that gleaming glass building, facing the most powerful people in the city, sent a shiver down his spine. "And me? What do you want me to do?" Her eyes flicked to him briefly. "Stand beside me. Listen. Learn. And when the time comes, speak." They reached the city center, the towers rising above them like steel giants. The streets shimmered under the rain, reflecting streaks of gold from the street lamps. She parked 2 blocks away, pulling a folded piece of paper from her coat. "This," she said, handing it to him, "is proof. Contracts, signatures, transfers, everything they've hidden. Keep it close. If something happens to me, you find the press. You understand?" Tommy hesitated, the weight of the paper heavy in his hand. "What's going to happen to you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped out of the car, the rain catching on her pale blue scarf. Tommy followed, clutching the folder like it was a lifeline. As they approached the building's glowing entrance, the security guards straightened, confusion flickering across their faces. She didn't slow down. The glass doors slid open, swallowing them into the bright, polished lobby. Tommy could feel his heart hammering as they headed for the elevator. The woman beside him looked as if she'd been waiting for this moment for years. Somewhere deep inside, he knew, whatever happened next, the city would never be the same. The elevator doors closed with a soft hiss, sealing them inside a mirrored box that climbed toward the top floor. The air was thick with anticipation. Tommy could see his own reflection, tense shoulders, clenched jaw, but it was her calm, steady gaze that anchored him. Nyasha stood with her hands folded in front of her, the pale blue scarf resting gently on her shoulders, as if this were just another ordinary day. When the doors slid open, the hushed luxury of the executive floor greeted them. Thick carpets absorbed the sound of their footsteps, and the walls were lined with framed photographs of deals and dignitaries. At the far end of the hall, through a set of heavy double doors, came the muffled voices of the board in session. They entered without knocking. The conversation stopped instantly. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward them, some narrowing in confusion, others widening in recognition. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Chief Akinwale, his hand frozen above a stack of documents. Nyasha didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, placing both palms on the table. Her voice was firm, each word slicing through the silence. "This company's future changes today." Murmurs rippled through the room, but she raised a hand to quiet them. "For 10 years, I stayed in the shadows while you steered Apex Towers into the ground with greed and arrogance. That ends now." She pulled a slim envelope from her bag and slid it toward the nearest board member. "Inside are the original founding documents. They prove that I hold 62% of this company's shares. Effective immediately, Chief Akinwale, you are relieved of your duties." Gasps erupted. Chief Akinwale rose to his feet, his face darkening. "You can't just walk in here and—" "I can," Nyasha interrupted, her eyes locked on his. "And I will. The vote will be recorded now." Board members exchanged glances. One by one, they nodded, some reluctantly, others with a sense of relief. The motion passed. Tommy stood frozen, watching the man he had once admired reduced to silence. Cameras flashed as someone from the press slipped in, alerted by a leak no doubt planted by Nyasha herself. In that moment, Tommy understood this was more than revenge. It was a reclamation of power and a lesson no one in this room would ever forget. Nyasha turned to leave, and without looking back, she said, "The cleaning is done. Now let the rebuilding begin." The doors closed behind them, but the echo of her words lingered in the stunned silence. By the next morning, the city was buzzing. Every news channel, every gossip blog, Every business column carried the same headline: the billionaire janitor who took back her throne. Clips of the boardroom takeover played on repeat. The image of Chief Akin Whale being forced to step down was everywhere, but it was the footage of Nyasha, composed, decisive, unshaken, that captured the public's imagination. Some called her a hero. Others whispered in awe, wondering how a woman who had spent years mopping floors could command such authority. Tommy couldn't escape it. The moment he stepped outside his apartment, he felt the weight of the stairs. Old friends ignored his calls. The flashy sports cars sat unused, gathering dust in the garage. In less than 24 hours, the world had shifted, and he was no longer at the center of it. Inside Apex Towers, the changes began immediately. Nyasha's presence was felt on every floor. Departments once ruled by fear now worked with a strange, cautious hope. Her first orders weren't about profits or expansion. They were about cleaning, not the marble floors, but the corruption that had seeped into every corner. Tommy walked the halls like a ghost. The employees he used to mock now barely acknowledged him. And deep down, he knew why. His arrogance had been a shield, but now it had shattered, leaving him exposed. Late in the afternoon, he found himself outside Nyasha's office. He hesitated, hand hovering over the door handle. Through the glass, he saw her at the desk, head bent over a document, the pale blue scarf pooling softly at her side. For the first time, he noticed how steady her hands were, how deliberate every movement seemed. When she looked up, their eyes met. There was no triumph in her gaze, no cruelty, only a quiet, unyielding resolve. She gestured for him to enter. Tommy stepped inside, unsure what to say. Before he could speak, Nyasha closed the file and folded her hands. "I told you once that one day you'd understand," she said. "That day is here." Her words weren't loud, but they cut deeper than any public humiliation. In that moment, Tommy realized this wasn't about his ruined reputation. It was about the kind of man he still had the chance to become, if he was willing to change. The city outside roared with stories of scandal and power, but in that quiet office, a different story was beginning. One that would decide whether Tommy would sink completely or find a way back. The rain had started again, turning the city streets into a blur of glistening asphalt and flashing neon lights. Tommy wandered aimlessly, his hands buried in his pockets, his mind a storm of thoughts he couldn't quiet. It had been 3 days since he'd walked out of Nyasha's office, and her words still echoed in his head. He had tried to call a few old friends, the ones who used to laugh at his jokes and follow him into every expensive club. Not a single one picked up. His father hadn't spoken to him since their argument, the kind of silence that felt colder than anger. At night, Tommy slept in the corner of his apartment, surrounded by unopened bills and empty takeout boxes. The sports car had been repossessed. The designer clothes were worth less than the rent he couldn't pay. For the first time in his life, there was no one to fix his mistakes, no one to shield him from the consequences. On the 4th morning, a knock came at the door. It wasn't a friend or even a debt collector. It was a former co-worker from Apex Towers, a man Tommy had once humiliated in front of the whole office. He didn't smile, but he didn't turn away either. "I heard you're looking for work," the man said. "There's a warehouse down by the docks. It's hard labor, but it's honest." Tommy hesitated. The thought of lifting crates and sweating under the sun felt like punishment. But something in him knew this was the only lifeline he would get. The next day, he stood in the warehouse. Boots heavy with dust, his once manicured hands wrapped around the coarse grip of a dolly. The work was exhausting, the pay barely enough for a single meal, but it was real. For the first time, he felt the weight of his own effort. Still, the shame lingered. At night, lying on the thin mattress in his rented room, he would close his eyes and see the moment in the lobby, the flash of the pale blue scarf, the way Nyasha's eyes had looked at him, not with hatred, not even with pity, but with the quiet expectation that he could still be more than this. He didn't know if he was ready to believe her, but he knew one thing: his old life was gone, and if he wanted a future, he would have to build it with his own hands. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the narrow alley into a glistening trap of puddles and shadows. Tommy's boots splashed through the water as he followed the man who had promised him a way out. A quick job, easy money, no questions asked. Every instinct told him it was a mistake, but desperation had long since drowned out his better judgment. They stopped in front of a tall, unassuming townhouse at the edge of the district. Its windows were dark, the kind of dark that didn't feel empty but watched. The man gave Tommy a small nod, a gesture that felt more like a shove into something he couldn't escape. Inside, the air was warmer but heavier, thick with the scent of polished wood and old paper. Tommy took one step into the living room and froze. She was there. Mimar Grace sat in a high-backed chair by the fireplace, the flames painting her face in sharp lines. She wasn't in her janitor's uniform anymore. Her pale blue scarf rested neatly on her shoulders, and in her hands she held a small porcelain cup of tea, as if she had been expecting him for hours. The man who had led Tommy here slipped out silently, shutting the door behind him. Tommy's throat tightened. You knew I'd come?" Grace's eyes didn't waver. "I've always known where desperation leads you, Tommy. You've been running in circles, thinking you can escape the consequences. But every road you take leads here." He looked around, searching for an exit, but the only sound was the steady crackle of the fire and the faint hum of rain against the windows. "I don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. Grace leaned forward, her gaze like a weight he couldn't shake off. "You will, but not tonight." And then, without warning, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving only the orange flicker of the fire and the feeling that someone else was there, watching from the shadows.